Hello and welcome to this tour of Endjin's Global Brand Insights Report, which generates insights for 25 global brands using 20 years of financial data. We crafted this report for educational purposes to highlight features in Power BI that allow you to work with data rich in compelling imagery. Now, in this example, we've chosen to work with global brands that have logos that are widely recognized by everyone. We wanted to show you how you can use these logos in a Power BI report to improve accessibility and the overall end-user experience. We've picked 25 brands across 5 categories of technology, food and drink, entertainment, finance, and automotive. And each of those categories in their own right invokes some imagery which we've used in the report, and you'll see that later. We then sourced 20 years of financial data at daily granularity for each of these companies to give us something to work with in the report. We've loaded this data into Power BI and then generated descriptive analytics over the data to start to generate data stories. Before we show you the report, let's go into a bit more detail about how we sourced and prepared the data. To source the data, we used the Yahoo Finance Python package. This enables you to connect to and download data from the API provided by Yahoo Finance into a Pandas data frame. And with this package, it was really easy to download share price data and share volume traded data at daily granularity for each company. So it met our needs perfectly. We developed and ran the code in Visual Studio Code, which we love. We used a desktop machine and exported the final data into a set of local CSV files. Now, we could take this simple approach because this is not a production solution, and we're dealing with a relatively small amount of data, just over 100,000 records in total. So we're not I/O or CPU constrained in this case. However, if we did need to productionize or scale up this process, we could import the Jupyter Notebook into Microsoft Fabric and tweak the code so we were writing the data to one lake. Now, we haven't done that here, but perhaps if you're interested, we could show you that process in a future video. So in VS Code, we imported the Yahoo Finance package into a Jupyter Notebook, which was used to orchestrate the end-to-end task of downloading and wrangling the data ready for importing it into Power BI. Now, given this data comes from a mature API, it's nice and clean, so we didn't have to do too much work to the data. There were 4 key things we did really in the notebook. Firstly, we prepared the logos and icons that we wanted to use in the report and staged those on Azure on publicly facing blob storage so that the Power BI service can access those images. My colleague Paul, who's our designer at Endjin, took a lot of care here to source and create SVGs or vector graphics. And that meant that whatever size we chose to use the logos and icons at in the report, we knew that they would retain image quality because there's a vector-based graphics. So that's a key tip for you if you're going down this route. Then the other task we chose to do was to aggregate the data. We had to make multiple calls to the Yahoo Finance API, one for each company. So we had to aggregate the data up into one data set. Another task we've done in the notebook is to normalize the closing price data for the share prices. We realized because for each company, we're working with different ranges of share price and different currencies, that by normalizing the share price in this way between 0 for the lowest value and 1 for the highest value, we're able to create a level playing field and to support the like-for-like comparison we wanted to do between the different companies in the report. And then the final thing we've done in the notebook is to build a date dimension table. And this defines the rules that we wanted to apply to aggregate the data up from sort of raw daily level to weekly, monthly, and so on. And this plays an important role in the report. You'll see that later on. So having created a final set of CSV files, it was then a case of importing those into Power BI. That's a simple process. It takes a few seconds to do that. And also because we pushed all of the data wrangling into the Jupyter Notebook. There was very little to do in Power Query, so very quickly we could start working with the data in Power BI. Now, the first step was to create the relationships between the tables to construct a dimensional data model in Power BI with core financial data in the core fact table, and then a date dimension table, which we built in the notebook, and then a company dimension, which uses a snowflake arrangement to then group those companies into one of the 5 categories that I talked about earlier. And this star schema arrangement provides the foundation for the interactive report. And it's on top of that star schema that we also build our DAX measures, and we added a few of those. Now, DAX measures are formulas that are written in Power BI, and they're calculated dynamically based on the context in which they're being applied. In other words, as we build the report pages, and thereafter as users interact with visuals through actions such as filtering and drilling into the data, these DAX measures are recalculated based on that changing context in which they're being applied, and that brings the report and the calculations in the report to life. The most complex DAX measure we've created allows us to rank the companies against each other based on their normalized share price in any year. And then we've layered on top of that to actually calculate the change in rank from the previous year to the current year. We've tested these measures informally using the new DAX query view in Power BI. This allows us to inspect in a table the raw data alongside the output from the DAX measures, allowing us to check that the DAX measures are behaving as expected. Now, if this was a production workload, we would formalize these tests, running them externally as part of a continuous integration, continuous deployment process. One final thing that we've done to create the semantic model is to classify the columns which contain URLs that point to the logos and icons we've staged on blob storage as image URLs. This tells Power BI to render these URLs as images when we use them in the report. We ran some experiments to find out which of the visuals provided out of the box by Power BI support rendering these image URLs. And we found that actually only 5 of the 33 visuals provided with Power BI support this functionality. The biggest gap seems to be with the traditional bar, column, line, and area charts, where it make a lot of sense to be able to render an image URL column if you place it on the categorical axis. It'd be great if Microsoft could add support for this. But there's plenty of visuals that do support images, and that's what we've tried to focus on in the report. So now it's all about building the report pages that allow us to create that user journey, allows users to explore the data and create their data stories. So firstly, we've got our cover page. From here, we're directed to an introduction page, which provides the background and context for the report. From here, we can start to navigate around the different pages using the navigation icons on the left. This is our first use of imagery to build that user journey through the report. Firstly, the share price history screen. Here, there's a lot of information to consume, but you can start to pick out some global trends, such as the impact of the financial crisis in 2008, and more recently, the invasion of Ukraine in 2021. The logos and icons on this page use the new filter visual to allow you to filter the data. So for example, let's filter to companies in the tech category. And here we can clearly see the recent exponential rise of NVIDIA. Its share price has been boosted by the demand for its GPU technology, which provides the infrastructure on which many AI models are trained and then run. Moving on to market capitalization. We live in the digital age, so perhaps it's no surprise that the big tech companies dwarf all of the other brands that we've chosen to include in our reports. We use a custom tooltip here to surface more information about each company, including its logo, as we hover over the bars on the chart. Next, moving on to the location page. This allows us to visual where these brands have their headquarters around the world. And you can see they're relatively evenly spread, but there's also some notable gaps in areas such as South America Africa, and Oceania. The company listing page is a chance to show off the Power BI's table visual. Now here we really go to town with visual elements. We've got logos surfaced using our image URL, columns. We use icons to show the change in rank from year to year. Has it increased or decreased? We also use icons to show the risk rating of each company. We've got also conditional formatting as well for data bars to illustrate the magnitude of revenue growth seen by the individual companies. And this highlights NVIDIA's growth has overshadowed all of the other companies. Finally, we also use the new Sparkline feature in the table visual to summarize the share price trend for each company, with dots to highlight the lowest and the highest points. Moving on to the company trends or the category trends page, we show how monochrome pages can actually really pop visually by omitting the use of color and instead using shapes to highlight different patterns. This page somehow feels a bit easier on the eye. We use line and marker styles instead of color to separate the different categories on the chart. And we clearly identify those categories using series labels and a legend. It's a great example of how less can be more when it comes to a choice of palette. Moving on to the ranking page, here we've stolen an idea from Formula One. Formula One uses this visual as a lap chart to show the relative position of each driver lap after lap during the race. And here we've used this to show the relative ranking of each company in each year. And this is an interesting way of observing relative performance. And we've picked out here two of our financial services companies, Lloyds and Visa. And you can see clearly the contrasting performance they've enjoyed over the last 20 years in terms of how their share price has performed. An alternative means of showing the same data is a heat map. And here we've created a heat map using Power BI's highly flexible matrix visual. We've used years for the columns, companies as rows, and then we've dropped our average normalized share price DAX measure as the values. We've layered on top of that some conditional formatting that highlights low percentages in red, mid percentages in yellow, and high percentages in green. And this use of red, amber, green, or RAG, is a very common way of flagging good versus bad in reports. Now, it's quite hard on the eye. There's a lot of colors, but you can see in general, the performance of most companies is improving from left to right. But you can also easily spot the exceptions to this trend and focus in on those. Finally, we've developed a drill through that allows you to explore a specific company in a bit more detail. So let's look at Lloyds, for example. You can see here, we've applied our monochromatic design philosophy on this page. The main chart shows share price and the volume of shares traded. And there's buttons here to allow you to focus on different time frames where we choose appropriate granularities for those time frames as you move between them. So we hope this report has given you some ideas about the features in Power BI that are suited to things like analyzing brands, consuming financial data, and analyzing relative performance. We've used imagery throughout the report. We've got company logos, icons, and pictograms to support the user journey and to build those data stories throughout the report. We've used DAX measures to enhance the report. In this case, we rank the individual companies against each other, allowing us to uncover some interesting insights about relative performance. We've stolen some ideas from other domains. In this case, we took inspiration from Formula One, adapting their lap chart visual into this domain. And this kind of technique can really help to engage people. In this case, it would be getting the motorsports enthusiasts in the room sitting up and paying attention. We've also chosen a color palette that works. We showed, first of all, how monochrome pages can look really clean and allow you to cut through the noise. We also showed at the other end of the spectrum on our 2D heat map how we can adopt red, amber, green color palette to visualize high density information and bring out, trends in the data. Underpinning all of this is the principle of dimensional modeling, and one specific feature in our star schema was the bespoke date dimension that we crafted to allow us to aggregate from daily to weekly to monthly to quarterly to yearly levels, enabling that level of interactivity in the reports because users could drill up or down through that hierarchy. We've showed off some of the latest features in Power BI, which is constantly evolving, such as spark lines in table visuals, which are a really powerful way of summarizing financial trends. So I hope it's been a useful demonstration of how a solid semantic model and strong visual design can help bring data to life and enable you to tell data stories. If you've got any questions or any thoughts or have any feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Check out our other examples in the Power BI Data Stories gallery, and please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks very much for watching. Bye-bye.